American lifestyle influencer Ashlee Robinson, better known online as Ashlee Jenae. Now, she had been on what seemed to be a dream vacation to Zanzibar, celebrating her birthday and saying yes when her boyfriend popped the question. But within a few days, she was dead. CBS Weekend News anchor Zuri Zanzibar spoke with her family.
Her family is demanding answers. Tanzanian authorities opened an investigation, and as the details began to emerge, one truth became impossible to ignore. The man Ashlee had agreed to marry, the man who seemed to embody everything she had taught her followers to wait for, had been hiding a secret from the very beginning. A secret so devastating that when she discovered it, everything she had built, everything she believed, came crashing down in less than 72 hours. This is the story of a woman who taught others never to settle. A woman who built a public life on standards, boundaries, and self-worth. A woman who thought she had finally found a partner who matched her vision. But the life she showed the world and the reality she was living had become two entirely different things. And by the time she realized the truth, she was thousands of miles from home, isolated on an island, trapped in a villa with a man whose lies were beginning to unravel. What happened in that room? Why did 11 hours pass before anyone was told? And what secret was so catastrophic that it could turn an engagement into a nightmare in the span of a single day? Welcome to Case Crime Analyst. Before we go further, if you're interested in deep investigations into cases that demand answers, cases where the truth is buried under official narratives and unanswered questions, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit the like button. We bring you detailed, fact-based analysis of true crime stories that need to be told. McCann was married, not divorced, not separated, married to another woman. The entire time. We don't know exactly when Ashlee discovered the truth, but the timeline suggests it happened in early April, just days before her death. And the way events unfolded after that discovery tells a story of its own. The 3rd of April, 2025. Somewhere on the open plains of Tanzania, in the heart of an African safari, Joseph McCann got down on one knee. Behind him, a lion moved slowly through the tall grass. It wasn't staged. It wasn't a backdrop created for the camera. It was real, wild. The kind of moment people spend their entire lives hoping to experience. And in that moment, with the sun casting golden light across the savannah, Joseph asked Ashlee Jenae McGhee to marry him. She said yes. The video of the proposal spread almost immediately. Ashlee posted it to her Instagram and TikTok, and within hours, it had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. The comments poured in. Congratulations. This is beautiful. You deserve this. I'm so happy for you. Heart emojis filled the screen. Her followers, the women who had been with her through every post, every message about self-worth and boundaries, every lesson about not settling, were celebrating with her. This wasn't just Ashlee's victory, it was theirs too. Because if Ashlee could hold her ground and eventually find a man who met her standards, then maybe they could too. For Ashlee, this moment was the culmination of everything she had been working toward. Not just the proposal itself, but what it represented. She had built a life on the principle that you didn't have to accept less. And here, in one of the most cinematic settings imaginable, a man who seemed to embody success, stability, and status had chosen her. She hadn't compromised. She hadn't lowered her expectations. And the world was watching as her philosophy paid off. 2 days later, on April 5th, Ashlee turned 31. The celebration took place at a giraffe sanctuary in Tanzania. The setup was elaborate. Rose petals, red and white, were arranged on a wooden platform to spell out the words, "Happy Birthday, Ashlee." Ashlee stood in the center, feeding a giraffe, her smile radiant. The photo she posted that day wasn't just a birthday snapshot. It was a statement. The caption read, "I'm exactly where I need to be." Not just geographically, not just physically present at a giraffe sanctuary in Africa, but existentially, emotionally. She was exactly where she needed to be in life. She had just gotten engaged. She was celebrating her 31st birthday in one of the most beautiful places on earth. She was with a man who, by every visible measure, matched the life she had designed. Everything she had been telling her followers, everything she had been teaching, was coming together in this single moment, and she shared it, because that's what she did. She shared her life as proof that the soft life, the life built on refusing to settle, was real. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of comments, thousands of likes. Her followers celebrated with her. They saw this as confirmation that waiting, that holding your standards, that refusing to accept less would eventually lead to exactly this: a perfect proposal, a perfect birthday, a perfect life. But less than 24 hours later, everything changed. On April 6th, Ashlee and Joseph checked into the Zuri Zanzibar Resort, a luxury property on the northern coast of Zanzibar. This wasn't just any hotel. The Zuri Zanzibar is the kind of place people choose when they want perfection. Private villas, personalized service, white sand beaches stretching endlessly, turquoise water so clear it looks unreal. The resort is designed to provide privacy, tranquility, an escape from the outside world. It's the kind of place where couples go to celebrate engagements, honeymoons, milestones. It's designed for romance, for intimacy, for moments that are supposed to be remembered as the best of your life. But from the moment Ashlee and Joseph arrived, something was wrong. According to reports from Tanzanian police and confirmed by witnesses at the resort, the couple began arguing almost immediately. Not a small disagreement, not a brief moment of tension that gets smoothed over. Arguing, repeatedly, from the very first day. This is the detail that doesn't make sense. 24 hours earlier, Ashlee had posted a photo of herself feeding giraffes with the caption, "I'm exactly where I need to be." She had just accepted a marriage proposal. She had just celebrated her birthday in one of the most picturesque settings imaginable. Her life, at least the life visible to the outside world, was perfect. And then, in the span of one day, that perfection collapsed. Hotel staff noticed the change. Other guests heard disturbances. In a resort designed for serenity, where privacy is a selling point and tranquility is the entire appeal, the sounds coming from their villa stood out. This wasn't a couple enjoying their engagement. This was conflict. Sustained, repeated, unresolved. When conflict happens once, it can be explained away. Travel, stress, exhaustion, a misunderstanding that gets out of hand. But when conflict starts on day one and continues, when it becomes the pattern rather than the exception, it's no longer random. It's a structure. It's indicative of something deeper, something that can't be smoothed over with an apology or a night's sleep. So the question becomes unavoidable. What happened in the 24 hours between Ashlee's birthday post and their arrival at the Zuri Zanzibar Resort? What changed so drastically that a woman who had publicly declared she was exactly where she needed to be was now, according to multiple witnesses, in constant conflict with the man she had just agreed to marry? The most likely explanation is that she found out the truth, that somewhere between April 5th and April 6th, Ashlee Jenae McGhee discovered that Joseph McCann was married. That the engagement she had just accepted, the proposal she had shared with hundreds of thousands of people, the moment that was supposed to validate everything she had taught about waiting for the right person, was built on a lie. Imagine that realization. Imagine being a woman who had built an entire public brand on the principle of never settling, who had told thousands of women that they deserved honesty, loyalty, respect, who had positioned herself as proof that if you held your standards high enough, eventually a man would rise to meet them. And then, discovering that the man who proposed to you, the man you had showcased to your followers as evidence that your philosophy worked, was already married to someone else. The humiliation wouldn't just be private, it would be public. 100,000 people had watched Ashlee accept that proposal. They had celebrated with her. They had congratulated her. They had seen her as proof that the soft life, the life built on boundaries and self-respect, led to exactly this kind of outcome. And now, if the truth came out, all of that would be exposed as a fraud. Not because Ashlee had lied, but because she had been lied to. And she wasn't at home when she found out. She wasn't in Miami, surrounded by friends, with the ability to walk away, to process privately, to control the narrative. She was on an island, thousands of miles from home, thousands of miles from her support system, in a villa at a luxury resort with the man who had deceived her, with prearranged travel plans that couldn't be easily changed, with no immediate way out. For 3 days, the arguments continued. April 6th, April 7th, April 8th. 72 hours of sustained conflict in a place designed for peace. Staff at the Zuri Zanzibar noticed the tension. Other guests heard disturbances. The couple who had checked in as newly engaged, who should have been celebrating, were instead locked in a cycle of conflict that showed no signs of resolving. A luxury resort isn't a completely isolated space, no matter how private it appears. The villas may be separated by enough distance to create the illusion of seclusion, but there are shared pathways, shared dining areas, staff members moving through the property at all hours. In an environment like that, even the smallest behavioral changes are noticeable. A couple that stops appearing together at breakfast. A guest who used to smile and engage now withdrawn and silent. Sounds that don't belong. Raised voices in a place where the only thing you're supposed to hear is the ocean. For the people who work at a resort like the Zuri Zanzibar, reading guests isn't just a skill. It's part of the job. They're trained to notice when something is off, when a guest is unhappy, when a situation is escalating. And in this case, what they were noticing wasn't subtle. It was obvious. The couple in that villa were not okay. But here's the thing about being on an island when a relationship falls apart. You can't just leave. You can't get in your car and drive to a friend's house. You can't book a last-minute flight home without coordination, without planning, without the other person knowing. You're dependent on prearranged logistics. You're thousands of miles from anyone who knows you. You're in an environment where the other person, especially if they have more resources, more experience, more control, holds most of the power. Joseph McCann was 45 years old. Ashlee was 31. He had founded a financial company. He had a net worth in the tens of millions. He had the kind of experience and resources that come with age and success. Ashlee, for all her social media savvy and her ability to curate a beautiful life online, was in unfamiliar territory. She was on his trip, in a place he had chosen, surrounded by logistics he likely controlled. The imbalance wasn't just emotional, it was structural. And so for 3 days, the pressure built. No resolution. No break long enough for things to settle. No escape valve. Just the same conflict, repeating, accumulating, intensifying. The beauty of Zanzibar didn't change. The ocean was still turquoise. The sand was still white. The resort was still offering 5-star service. But none of that mattered. Because inside that villa, something was breaking. When pressure builds without release, something eventually gives. When conflict becomes the only rhythm, when there's no relief, no space to breathe, violence becomes possible. Not inevitable, but possible. And the question that would soon consume investigators, journalists, and Ashlee's family was simple. Who broke first? The 9th of April, 2025. Something happened inside that villa. The exact details remain unclear. The official language used in reports is deliberately vague. Something transpired in the room. Not, she died. Not, there was an accident. Not, an incident occurred. Something transpired. Passive, evasive, the kind of phrasing that raises more questions than it answers. What we know is this. At some point on April 9th, Ashlee Jenae McGhee died, and for 11 hours, no one outside that villa knew. Her family wasn't notified. Authorities in the United States weren't contacted. The world that had watched her get engaged, that had celebrated her birthday, that had followed her journey toward what she called the soft life, had no idea that she was gone. 11 hours. And then, finally, a phone call. Joseph McCann called a member of Ashlee's family, a woman named Ilana, and what he told her, according to later reports, was not the truth. He said that something had happened, that Ashlee was at the hospital, that she was okay, that she was stable, that Ilana didn't need to worry. But Ashlee wasn't okay. She wasn't stable. She was dead. And Joseph McCann knew it. So why, 11 hours after whatever had transpired in that room, would he tell Ashlee's family that she was alive? There are a few possible explanations. Shock, panic, an inability to process what had happened, and a desperate hope that somehow it wasn't real. But those explanations fall apart when you consider the specifics of what he said. He didn't say there had been an emergency. He didn't say something terrible had happened. He said she was okay. He said she was stable. He told the family not to worry. That's not the language of someone in shock. That's the language of someone trying to control a narrative. 11 hours is a long time. Long enough to think. Long enough to make decisions. Long enough to craft a story. And when Ashlee's family finally learned the truth, when they were told that she was dead, their immediate response was disbelief. Not disbelief that she was gone, but disbelief in the explanation they were being given. Because the initial reports coming out of Zanzibar suggested that Ashlee had taken her own life, that after a series of arguments with her fiancé, she had ended things on her own terms. But Ashlee's family rejected that narrative immediately. They didn't believe it. They didn't accept it. And they demanded a full investigation. Their suspicion wasn't baseless. It was rooted in what they knew about Ashlee, in the timeline of events, and in the behavior of the man who had waited 11 hours to tell them she was dead. A man who had lied about her condition. A man who had hidden the fact that he was married. A man whose presence in that villa was the only constant between the moment Ashlee was alive and the moment she wasn't. To understand why Ashlee's family refused to accept the initial explanation, you need to understand what she represented. Not just to her followers, but to the people who knew her personally. Ashlee Jenae McGhee was not a woman who gave up. She was not someone who crumbled under pressure. She had built a life, a brand, a community around the idea of resilience, around the idea that you controlled your narrative, that you didn't let circumstances define you, that you chose your life, actively and intentionally. The woman who posted, "I'm exactly where I need to be," on her 31st birthday was not someone who, 4 days later, would decide that life wasn't worth living. Not because people who seem strong can't struggle, not because public confidence always reflects private reality, but because the specific circumstances of Ashlee's death, the timeline, the location, the presence of a man who had been lying to her, didn't align with the story being told. Ashlee's family knew about the arguments. They knew things had gone wrong on the trip, but they also knew that Ashlee had resources. She had family. She had friends. She had a support system. If she wanted to leave, if she wanted to end the relationship, she had options. And the idea that she would choose to end her life instead of simply leaving a man who had lied to her didn't make sense. Not when you factored in who she was, not when you considered what she had built, not when you looked at the facts. And the facts were troubling. A woman who had just discovered her fiancé was married, 3 days of sustained conflict, an isolated location, a significant power imbalance, and then death, followed by 11 hours of silence, followed by a phone call that misrepresented what had happened. Ashlee's family began asking questions publicly. They demanded answers. They wanted to know what had happened in that room. They wanted to know why there had been an 11-hour delay in notification. They wanted to know why Joseph had lied when he finally made that call, and they wanted an autopsy that would provide clarity on the manner of Ashlee's death. Because the initial explanation, the one being circulated in Tanzanian media, didn't hold up under scrutiny. It required accepting that a woman who had just been publicly humiliated by a man's deception, who had discovered her engagement was a fraud, who was isolated on an island thousands of miles from home, chose to end her life rather than expose the truth. It required believing that Ashlee Jenae McGhee, a woman who had built her entire identity on refusing to accept less, chose silence and self-destruction over accountability and survival. And her family wasn't buying it. The secret that Joseph McCann had been hiding wasn't just a betrayal of Ashlee. It was a betrayal of everything she stood for. Ashlee had spent years teaching women to set boundaries, to demand honesty, to walk away from men who couldn't offer full commitment, full transparency, full respect. She had built a community of over 100,000 people around that message. And the man she had chosen, the man she had showcased as proof that her philosophy worked, had been lying to her from the beginning. He wasn't separated. He wasn't in the process of getting divorced. He was married, fully, legally, to another woman. And while the exact timeline of when Ashlee discovered this truth remains unclear, the shift in behavior tells the story. From April 5th, when she posted that she was exactly where she needed to be, to April 6th, when the arguments began, something changed. Something catastrophic enough to turn an engagement celebration into 3 days of sustained conflict. The most logical explanation is that she found out that between her birthday and their check-in at the Zuri Zanzibar Resort, the truth came to light. Maybe she saw something. Maybe someone told her. Maybe Joseph himself admitted it in a moment of pressure. But however it happened, the revelation would have been devastating. Because this wasn't just about her private heartbreak. It was about her public identity. Every post she had shared about Joseph, every photo of them together, every moment she had used to illustrate her philosophy about waiting for the right person, all of it was now evidence of her failure. Not because she had done anything wrong, but because she had been lied to. And in the world of social media, where perception is reality, the distinction wouldn't matter. She would be the woman who had been deceived. The woman who had taught others not to settle, only to settle for a married man. The humiliation would have been unbearable. Not just emotionally, but professionally. Her brand was built on credibility, on the idea that she knew what she was talking about, that she had lived the principles she preached. And now, that credibility was in ruins, because the man she had presented as her equal, as the partner who matched her standards, was a fraud. And she was trapped, on an island, in a villa, with him, thousands of miles from anyone who could help her process this, thousands of miles from the ability to control the narrative. Because eventually, the truth would come out. Eventually, people would find out that Joseph was married, and when they did, every question would be directed at her. Did you know? How could you not know? What does this say about everything you've been teaching? The pressure wasn't just emotional, it was existential. Everything she had built was at risk, and the person responsible was standing right in front of her. We don't know exactly what happened in that villa on April 9th. The autopsy results that Ashlee's family demanded would eventually provide some answers, but at the time of the initial reports, the manner of death remained under investigation. What we do know is that the official narrative being circulated, the one suggesting Ashlee had taken her own life after an argument, was immediately challenged by those who knew her, because the timeline didn't support it, the circumstances didn't support it. And the behavior of Joseph McCann, the man who waited 11 hours to notify her family, the man who lied about her condition when he finally made that call, didn't inspire confidence that the truth was being told. Ashlee's family went public with their suspicions. They spoke to media outlets. They demanded transparency from Tanzanian authorities. They made it clear that they would not accept a rushed conclusion, a convenient explanation that allowed a wealthy, powerful man to walk away without scrutiny. They wanted answers. And they wanted the world to know that Ashlee Jenae McGhee did not die quietly, that her death would not be dismissed, that the woman who had taught so many others to demand more would have her own story treated with the seriousness it deserved. The international attention that followed put pressure on the investigation. American media picked up the story. Ashlee's followers, the community she had built, began demanding justice. The narrative that Joseph and potentially local authorities had hoped to establish, a tragic but uncomplicated story of a woman who couldn't handle a breakup, was falling apart. Because too many people knew who Ashlee was. Too many people understood that the woman in those Instagram posts, the woman who had fed giraffes on her birthday and declared she was exactly where she needed to be, was not someone who gave up, and so the questions multiplied. What happened in that villa? Was there evidence of a struggle? Were there injuries inconsistent with self-harm? What did the autopsy reveal? Why the 11-hour delay? What was Joseph doing during those 11 hours? Who else was present? What did hotel staff witness? Every question led to more questions, and at the center of all of them was a simple, unavoidable truth. A woman had traveled to one of the most beautiful places on earth to celebrate her engagement, and 4 days after her birthday, she was dead. And the only person who knew exactly what happened was the man who had lied to her about being married, the man who had lied to her family about her condition, the man who had waited 11 hours before telling anyone she was gone. Ashlee Jenae McGhee's story is not just about her death. It's about the life she built, the message she shared, the community she created. For over 100,000 people, Ashlee represented possibility. She represented the idea that you didn't have to accept less, that you could build a life on your own terms. That, waiting for the right person, holding your standards, refusing to compromise, would eventually pay off. And for a brief moment it seemed like it had. The proposal on the safari, the birthday at the giraffe sanctuary, the engagement that went viral. All of it seemed to confirm what she had been teaching. That the soft life, the life built on boundaries and self-respect, was real. That it worked. But the truth was more complicated. Because the man she had chosen, the man who seemed to embody everything she had been waiting for, was hiding something. Something that, when it came to light, destroyed the narrative she had built. And in the aftermath of that destruction, in the chaos of discovery and confrontation and isolation, Ashlee Jenae McGhee died. Her family refuses to believe it was by her own hand. They point to the timeline, the conflict, the deception, the 11-hour delay, the lies Joseph told when he finally called. They demand an investigation that takes all of those factors into account. That doesn't rush to a conclusion. That doesn't allow a powerful man to control the narrative. Because Ashlee's story doesn't end with her death. It continues in the questions her family is asking, in the pressure they're putting on authorities, in the attention her followers are bringing to the case, in the refusal to let this become another story of a woman whose death is explained away without scrutiny. The autopsy results would eventually be released. The investigation would continue. And the truth, whatever it was, would begin to emerge. But even before those answers came, one thing was already clear. Ashlee Jenae McGhee did not die in obscurity. She died with a community watching. A community that had learned from her, that had been inspired by her, that would not let her death be dismissed. And the man who had proposed to her on that safari, who had watched her feed giraffes on her birthday, who had checked into a luxury resort with her and then waited 11 hours to tell anyone she was dead, would have to answer for what happened in that villa. Not just to investigators, not just to Tanzanian authorities, but to the thousands of people who had watched Ashlee build her life, who had celebrated her engagement, who had believed in the message she was sharing. Because in the end, Ashlee's story is a reminder that the life you see online is never the full picture, that the moments captured in photos and videos are just that, moments, and that behind the curated beauty, behind the perfect captions and the viral proposals, real people are navigating real complications, real deceptions, real dangers. Ashlee Jenae McGhee deserved the life she was building. She deserved the honesty she demanded. She deserved the partnership she had waited for. And she deserved to come home. If this case has raised questions for you, if you want to see how this investigation unfolds, make sure you're subscribed to Case Crime Analyst. We'll be following every development in this story, every piece of evidence, every answer Ashlee's family fights for. Hit that like button and stay with us as we continue to demand the truth, because cases like this don't get solved without attention, without pressure, without people like you refusing to look away. For 3 consecutive days, witnesses at the Zuri Zanzibar Resort had observed signs of conflict between Ashlee Robinson and Joseph McCann. Staff members heard raised voices. Other guests noticed the tension. The couple who had checked in as newly engaged were clearly in the middle of something serious. But on the evening of April 8th, the situation escalated past the point where it could be ignored. According to confirmed reports, guests staying in villas near Ashlee and Joseph's accommodation heard a disturbance significant enough that they felt compelled to notify resort staff. This is not a small detail. Luxury resorts operate on discretion. Guests pay premium prices specifically for privacy. The unspoken rule is that you don't involve yourself in other people's business. You don't report noise unless you genuinely believe something is wrong. So when multiple guests approached the front desk or contacted management to report what they were hearing, it signaled that the situation had crossed a threshold. This wasn't ordinary couple conflict. This was something that made strangers feel unsafe. The resort management responded with unusual decisiveness. They didn't just send someone to check on the couple. They didn't issue a warning or request that they keep the noise down. They physically separated them. According to reports, Joseph McCann was moved to a different villa, located approximately 10 minutes away by vehicle. In the hospitality industry, especially at a property like the Zuri Zanzibar, relocating a guest from their room is not a decision made lightly. It requires assessment by senior staff. It involves logistical coordination. And most importantly, it reflects the resort's judgment that the current arrangement posed some kind of risk, either to the guests themselves, to other visitors, or to the property's reputation. Think about what that means. A resort whose entire business model depends on creating seamless, luxurious experiences chose to disrupt that experience for one of their guests. They moved a man who had checked in with his fiancée to a separate villa because the conflict between them had become serious enough to warrant intervention. That decision wasn't made casually. It was made because the staff believed that keeping them in the same space could lead to something worse. And their instincts were correct. Because in the hours immediately following that separation, Ashlee Jenae McGhee would be found unresponsive. And the timeline of those hours, the sequence of events between the moment Joseph was moved and the moment Ashlee was discovered, remains the most scrutinized and least explained period of the entire case. 2 to 3 hours. That's the window we're talking about. According to available information, approximately 2 to 3 hours passed between the time Joseph McCann was relocated to a different villa and the time Ashlee Robinson was found in her room. 2 to 3 hours. In most contexts, that's nothing. The length of a movie, a leisurely dinner, an afternoon nap. But in this context, those hours became everything. Because everything that happened before, the proposal, the birthday, the discovery of Joseph's marriage, the 3 days of fighting, all of it led to this specific window of time. And everything that happened after, the investigation, the family's suspicions, the unanswered questions, all of it hinges on what occurred during those hours. Here's what we know. We know the starting point. Joseph was moved to a separate villa on the evening of April 8th. We know the ending point. Ashlee was found in her room, either in critical condition or already deceased, depending on which reports you read, roughly 2 to 3 hours later. But everything that happened between those 2 points is a gap, an evidentiary black hole. There is no minute-by-minute account. There is no clear sequence of confirmed events. There are only questions. Was Ashlee alone during that entire period? Did resort staff check on her after Joseph was moved? Was there any communication between the two of them during the separation? Did Joseph remain in the villa he'd been assigned, or did he leave at some point? Were there security cameras that captured movement on the property? Did Ashlee contact anyone, family, friends, during those hours? Did she try to call for help? What condition was the villa in when she was found? Were there signs of a struggle? Were there medications present? Was there a note? None of these questions have been answered publicly, and that absence of information is where speculation begins. Because when there's a gap this significant in a story that ends with someone's death, people will try to fill it. The internet will construct theories. True crime communities will analyze every available detail, and in the absence of official transparency, those theories gain traction whether they're accurate or not. But let's stay focused on what we can confirm. The gap exists. 2 to 3 hours between separation and discovery. During that time, something happened that resulted in Ashlee Jenae McGhee's death. and the person who could provide the most clarity about what occurred, Joseph McCann, has not given a detailed public account, at least not one that's been made available to Ashlee's family or to the wider world. The significance of this gap cannot be overstated, because if this case ever moves forward legally, if there are ever charges filed, if there is ever a trial, the central question will be what happened during those 2 to 3 hours. Who was where? Who did what? Who saw what? And most importantly, can anyone verify Joseph McCann's account of events? Right now, based on publicly available information, we don't have those answers. What we have is a timeline with a hole in it, and on either side of that hole are facts that make the lack of explanation even more troubling. The discovery of Ashlee's condition, whatever the exact circumstances were, triggered a response. Emergency services were contacted. Medical personnel arrived. At some point, it became clear that Ashlee was either deceased or could not be saved. And from that moment, another clock started ticking, the notification clock. The period of time between when authorities and resort staff knew what had happened and when Ashlee's family was told. 11 hours. 11 hours passed from the time Ashlee was found until her family received their first communication about the situation. 11 hours during which the people who loved her, who had watched her celebrate her birthday just days earlier, who had congratulated her on her engagement, had no idea that anything was wrong. 11 hours during which Ashlee's social media remained frozen on those last happy posts. The giraffes, the rose petals, the caption that now feels unbearably tragic. I'm exactly where I need to be. Her followers didn't know. Her friends didn't know. Her family didn't know. For 11 hours, the only people who knew that Ashlee Jenae McGhee was dead were the authorities in Zanzibar, the staff at the Zuri Zanzibar Resort, and Joseph McCann. And when the call finally came, it didn't come from the police. It didn't come from the U.S. Embassy. It didn't come from the resort management. It came from Joseph. And according to later accounts from Ashlee's family, specifically a relative named Alana who received the call, what Joseph told them was not the truth. He said that something had happened, that there had been an incident, that Ashlee was at the hospital, that she was okay, that she was stable, and that they didn't need to worry. But Ashlee wasn't okay. She wasn't stable. She was dead. And Joseph McCann knew it. So the question that Ashlee's family has been asking ever since is simple and devastating. Why would he lie? There are a few possible explanations, none of them satisfying. The first is shock, that Joseph was so traumatized by whatever had occurred that he couldn't bring himself to say the words. That telling Ashlee's family she was dead felt too real, too final, and so he defaulted to a version of events that gave him more time to process. But this explanation falls apart when you examine the specifics of what he said. He didn't just avoid saying she was dead. He actively provided false reassurance. He said she was stable. He told them not to worry. That's not the language of someone too shocked to speak clearly. That's the language of someone managing a narrative. The second explanation is that he was buying time, that he knew questions were coming, that he knew once the family learned Ashlee was dead, they would want answers immediately, and that by delaying the full truth, he gave himself 11 additional hours to prepare, to consult with legal representation, perhaps, to coordinate with local authorities, to get his story straight. This explanation is more cynical, but it fits the facts better, because 11 hours is a long time, long enough to think, long enough to plan, long enough to make decisions about what to say and what to withhold. The third explanation is the one Ashlee's family fears most, that Joseph lied because he had something to hide, that the manner of Ashlee's death was not what it appeared to be, and that controlling the flow of information, delaying the family's ability to ask questions, was part of a larger effort to shape the official narrative before anyone could challenge it. We don't know which of these explanations is correct. We may never know. What we do know is that when Ashlee's family finally learned the full truth, when they were told that she was not at a hospital, that she was not stable, that she was in fact deceased, their grief was compounded by suspicion, because the first piece of information they received about their daughter's death was a lie, and that lie came from the man who had been with her when she died. Within hours of learning the truth, Ashlee's family began to push back against the narrative that was emerging from Tanzania, because the initial reports coming out of Zanzibar were framing Ashlee's death in a very specific way. Local media outlets were reporting that she had taken her own life, that, after a series of arguments with her fiancé, after what was described as a falling out just days after their engagement, Ashlee Robinson had ended things on her own terms. The story being told was one of romantic conflict leading to a desperate, tragic act. A heartbroken woman, a failed relationship, a final decision made in isolation and despair. And Ashlee's family rejected that story immediately. Not because they wanted to be difficult, not because they were in denial about the possibility of suicide, but because the woman they knew, the woman they had raised and loved and supported, did not match the person being described in those reports. Ashlee Jenae McGhee was not someone who gave up. She was not someone who, when faced with betrayal and humiliation, chose to destroy herself rather than walk away. Let's revisit who Ashlee was. Not the influencer persona, not the curated social media presence, but the actual human being. Ashlee had built her entire public identity around resilience, around the idea that you controlled your own narrative, that you didn't let other people's failures define your worth, that when a relationship didn't serve you, you left. You didn't beg. You didn't compromise your standards. You certainly didn't end your life over a man who had lied to you. The soft life philosophy that Ashlee championed wasn't just about luxury and aesthetics. It was about autonomy. It was about rejecting the cultural narratives that told women they needed to suffer to be loved, that they needed to tolerate disrespect to maintain relationships, that their value was tied to their ability to keep a man. Ashlee's entire message was the opposite. You are enough on your own. You deserve honesty. You deserve respect. And if someone can't give you those things, you walk away. So the idea that Ashlee, upon discovering that Joseph was married, upon realizing that the engagement she had shared with 100,000 people was built on a lie, would choose to kill herself rather than simply leave him, didn't make sense to the people who knew her. Not when you factored in who she was, not when you considered what she had built, because Ashlee had options. She had family who would have supported her. She had friends who would have helped her leave the island. She had resources. She had a platform. If she wanted to expose Joseph's deception, she could have. If she wanted to end the relationship and move on, she could have. Walking away was literally what she taught other women to do. And beyond the question of character, there were practical problems with the suicide narrative. If Ashlee had been so distraught that she was considering ending her life, why hadn't she reached out to anyone? Why were there no calls to family in those final hours? No messages to friends? No posts that hinted at despair? Her social media had gone silent after the birthday post, but that silence wasn't unusual for someone on vacation. It didn't suggest crisis. It suggested she was living her life offline. And then there was the intervention itself. The resort had separated them. The immediate source of conflict had been removed. Joseph was in a different villa, 10 minutes away. If the arguments were what had pushed Ashlee to the edge, then the separation should have provided relief, not escalation. The pressure had been released. She was alone, yes, but alone can also mean safe. Alone can mean space to think, to breathe, to plan your next move. So why, in the 2 to 3 hours after finally being separated from the man who had been lying to her, would Ashlee choose that moment to end her life? It didn't add up. And Ashlee's family wasn't willing to accept an explanation that required ignoring everything they knew about her. So they began to fight, publicly, loudly, with the kind of determination that comes from knowing that if you don't demand answers, you'll never get them. Ashlee's family started speaking to media outlets. They gave interviews. They shared details about the 11-hour notification delay. They talked about Joseph's phone call, about the lie he told when he said Ashlee was stable. They made it clear that they did not believe the initial reports coming out of Tanzania, and they demanded a full, transparent investigation. One of the first steps they took was launching a GoFundMe campaign. The stated purpose was to help cover the costs of bringing Ashlee's body home, of arranging a funeral, of managing the logistical and financial burden that comes with an unexpected death thousands of miles away. But the campaign was also about something larger. It was about mobilizing a community, about turning the 100,000 people who had followed Ashlee's journey into advocates for justice. And the response was immediate and overwhelming. Ashlee's followers, the women who had watched her feed giraffes on her birthday, who had celebrated her engagement, who had seen her as proof that the soft life was real, now rallied around her family. They donated. They shared the campaign. They amplified the family's calls for answers. The comment sections on Ashlee's final posts, which had been filled with congratulations just days earlier, now became memorials, places where strangers mourned a woman they had never met but felt they knew, places where anger was building at the idea that her death might be explained away without scrutiny. And as the family's public campaign gained traction, something else began to happen. The internet started digging. True crime communities on Reddit, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube began compiling information about Joseph McCann. Who was he really? What was his background? And most importantly, what could be verified about his claims? It didn't take long for the most damaging detail to surface. Joseph McCann was married, not separated. not in the process of divorce, married, to another woman. The entire time he had been with Ashlee, during their relationship, during the proposal, during the trip to Tanzania, he had a wife. And Ashlee, the woman who had built a brand on never settling, who had taught thousands of women to demand full honesty and commitment, had been engaged to a man who was legally bound to someone else. When this information became public, it changed the entire tenor of the conversation, because suddenly the 3 days of conflict made sense. The abrupt shift from Ashlee's birthday post, where she declared she was exactly where she needed to be, to the arguments that started the moment they checked into the Zuri Zanzibar, had an explanation. She had found out. Somewhere between April 5th and April 6th, Ashlee had discovered that Joseph was married, and everything that followed, the fighting, the resort intervention, the separation, flowed from that discovery. The revelation also exposed Joseph to a new level of public scrutiny, because now he wasn't just the man who had been with Ashlee when she died. He was the man who had lied to her from the beginning, the man who had proposed to a woman while being married to another, the man who had built a relationship on deception and then, when that deception was discovered, had been present for Ashlee's death, and who had waited 11 hours to tell her family, and who had lied about her condition when he finally called. The optics were devastating, and the questions multiplied. Did Joseph's wife know about Ashlee? How long had he been married? Was this a pattern? Had there been other women? Were there financial motivations for keeping the marriage secret? And most urgently, did Joseph's deception play a role in what happened on April 9th? As public pressure mounted, Ashlee's family intensified their demands for a thorough autopsy. Because in cases like this, where the circumstances of death are disputed, where there are questions about what actually occurred, forensic evidence becomes crucial. An autopsy can reveal manner of death, cause of death, whether injuries are consistent with self-harm or with something else, whether there were substances in Ashlee's system, whether the physical evidence supports the narrative being told. The family wanted answers that couldn't be shaped by someone's account of events. They wanted science. They wanted documentation. They wanted a medical examiner to look at Ashlee's body and provide conclusions based on evidence, not speculation. And they wanted those results to be transparent, accessible, and subject to independent review if necessary. Days passed. The wait for autopsy results is always agonizing for families, but in this case, it was compounded by distance, by jurisdictional complications, by the fact that the examination was being conducted in Tanzania rather than the United States. Different standards, different protocols, different levels of resources, and the nagging fear that if the results came back supporting the suicide narrative, would they be accurate, or would they be convenient? The family also began asking questions about the physical evidence from the scene. What condition was the villa in when Ashlee was found? Were there signs of a struggle, overturned furniture, broken objects? Or was everything neat, undisturbed, consistent with someone acting alone? What about Ashlee's belongings? Her phone, specifically. Had anyone examined it? Were there messages sent in those final hours? Calls made or received? Search history that might indicate state of mind? And what about security footage? The Zuri Zanzibar is a luxury resort. Surely there are cameras on the property. Cameras in common areas, near villa entrances, along pathways. If Joseph had left his assigned villa after being separated from Ashlee, wouldn't that have been captured? If anyone else had approached Ashlee's villa, wouldn't there be a record? The family wanted to know if that footage existed, if it had been reviewed, and what it showed. These weren't unreasonable questions. They were the basic building blocks of any serious investigation. But getting answers proved difficult. Because Ashlee had died on foreign soil, the investigation was being conducted by Tanzanian authorities, who had different procedures, different timelines, different obligations than American law enforcement would have. The U.S. Embassy could provide support, could advocate for the family, but couldn't compel a foreign government to share information. And Joseph McCann, the person who could answer many of these questions directly, had gone silent. According to reports, Joseph had legal representation. He was not giving media interviews. He was not responding to the family's public calls for transparency, and it was unclear whether he had provided a detailed statement to Tanzanian police about what had happened in that villa. What we know is that he had not been arrested. He had not been charged. And at some point after Ashlee's death, he left Zanzibar and returned to the United States. While the official investigation proceeded at its own pace, the online true crime community was conducting an investigation of its own. And this is where we need to be extremely careful about what we present as fact versus what is speculation. Because when a case gains traction online, when thousands of people start digging into someone's background, compiling timelines, sharing theories, The line between legitimate investigation and unfounded accusation can blur very quickly. According to discussions in various online forums, not confirmed by any official source, there have been claims that Joseph McCann had visited Zanzibar multiple times before the trip with Ashlee. If this is true, and that's a significant if, it would be meaningful, because it would suggest that Joseph was familiar with the island, that he knew the area, that he potentially knew staff at the resort, knew how things operated, knew the layout. It would mean that when he took Ashlee to Zanzibar, he wasn't exploring someplace new with her. He was bringing her to a location where he had the advantage of experience and familiarity. Why does this matter? Because familiarity equals control. If you've been somewhere multiple times, you know where things are. You know who to talk to. You know how to navigate systems. And in a situation where conflict is escalating, where someone might be trying to leave, having that level of control over the environment is significant. But again, this detail is unverified. It's being discussed in online spaces, but it hasn't been confirmed by authorities or by credible investigative journalism. Another claim that has circulated, also unverified, is that Joseph was seen leaving his villa at night during the stay. Not specifically on the night of April 8th after the separation, but at some point during the 3 days they were at the resort. If accurate, this raises questions. Where was he going? Who was he meeting? Was this before or after the conflict started? But without verification, without witnesses willing to go on record, without security footage to corroborate, this remains in the realm of speculation. There have also been online discussions about Joseph's financial situation, questions about whether his net worth, estimated at around $45 million, was accurate, whether his cryptocurrency business was stable or struggling, whether there were financial pressures that might have motivated certain behaviors. But again, absent access to actual financial records, absent reporting from credible outlets with documentary evidence, these remain theories. So why mention these details at all if they're unverified? Because they exist. Because they're part of the larger conversation around this case. Because if the investigation is thorough, if authorities are doing their job, these are the kinds of questions they should be asking and answering. Not because internet sleuths raised them, but because they're logical avenues of inquiry given the circumstances. But here's the critical distinction. Unverified information can point toward questions that need to be asked. It cannot, and should not, be treated as evidence. It cannot be used to draw conclusions about guilt or innocence. And it cannot replace the work of actual investigators with actual access to actual evidence. The danger of online true crime communities is that they can create echo chambers where speculation becomes accepted as fact, where theories gain so much traction that they start to feel like truth, and where individuals who haven't been charged with anything, who are legally entitled to the presumption of innocence, get tried and convicted in the court of public opinion. So let's be clear about where we are. Joseph McCann has not been charged with any crime related to Ashlee Jenae McGhee's death. The investigation in Tanzania has not publicly concluded that her death was anything other than what initial reports suggested. And while Ashlee's family disputes that conclusion, while they continue to demand answers, the legal reality is that, as of now, this is an open question. What we can say with certainty is that Joseph lied to Ashlee about being married, that he lied to her family about her condition after she died, that he was present during 3 days of escalating conflict, that he was separated from Ashlee by resort management because the situation had become serious enough to warrant intervention, and that in the 2 to 3 hours after that separation, Ashlee died. Those are facts. Everything else is questions. One of those questions is whether Ashlee's death fits into a larger pattern, because she is not the first woman to die while on vacation with a romantic partner in a foreign country. And the similarities between these cases are difficult to ignore. Gabby Petito, Carla Stefaniak, Shanquella Robinson. Each of these women traveled to what should have been beautiful, memorable destinations. Each of them died under circumstances that raised immediate questions. And each of their families faced the same agonizing fight for truth that Ashlee's family is facing now. There's a particular vulnerability that comes with being in an unfamiliar place with someone who has more control than you do. When you're on vacation, especially in a foreign country, you're removed from your support system. Your family isn't a phone call and a 30-minute drive away. They're thousands of miles away, separated by oceans and time zones and international boundaries. Your friends can't come get you if things go wrong. You can't just leave and go stay with someone you trust. You're dependent on the logistics that have been arranged. The flights, the accommodations, the itinerary. And if the person you're with controls those logistics, if they booked the trip, if they're managing the money, if they have more experience navigating that particular location, the power imbalance becomes stark. You can't easily walk away. You can't easily assert independence, because doing so requires resources, requires planning, requires the ability to navigate systems you're unfamiliar with. And if conflict is escalating, if you're starting to feel unsafe, those barriers become even more daunting. This is what Ashlee was facing. She was on an island, thousands of miles from home, in a resort that Joseph may have been familiar with if the unverified reports about prior visits are accurate. She had just discovered that he was married, that everything he'd told her was a lie. She was humiliated, she was angry, and she was trapped. Not physically locked in a room, but trapped by circumstance, by geography, by the simple fact that leaving required coordination she might not have had the power to execute alone. And in situations like that, when someone feels cornered, when they can't see a way out, when the pressure has been building for days with no release, violence becomes possible. Not inevitable, but possible. And the question that haunts cases like this is always the same. Who broke first? Was it Ashlee, overwhelmed by betrayal and isolation, who made a desperate decision? Or was it Joseph, facing exposure and consequences, who did something that he's now working very hard to hide? We don't know, but the pattern suggests we should be asking. What we do know is that Ashlee Jenae McGhee's followers are not letting this go. The community she built, the women she inspired, are keeping pressure on this case in ways that might not have happened even 5 years ago. Social media has changed the dynamics of how these stories unfold. It's no longer possible for a case to be quietly closed in a foreign country without the victim's home community ever knowing the details, because Ashlee's followers were watching. They saw the proposal. They celebrated the birthday. And when she went silent, when the posts stopped, they noticed. And when the news broke that she was dead, that community didn't just mourn privately. They mobilized. They shared information. They demanded answers. They made sure that Ashlee's name stayed in the conversation. Hashtags emerged. Justice for Ashlee. Her name trended. True crime podcasters picked up the story. YouTube channels like this one committed to covering every development. And that sustained attention creates pressure. Pressure on Tanzanian authorities to conduct a thorough investigation. Pressure on American media to keep reporting. Pressure on anyone involved to know that the world is watching. This is Ashlee's legacy in a way she never could have anticipated. The platform she built to teach women about self-worth, about boundaries, about refusing to settle, has become the vehicle through which her community demands accountability for her death. The followers who learned from her in life are fighting for her in death. And that matters. Because cases like this, cases that happen in foreign jurisdictions, cases where the victim is far from home and the circumstances are murky, can disappear if no one's paying attention. But Ashlee's case won't disappear. Her community won't let it. So where does that leave us right now? With more questions than answers. With a family that believes their daughter did not take her own life and a community that supports them. With a man who has remained largely silent despite being the last person to see Ashlee alive. With an investigation that may or may not be thorough, may or may not be transparent, may or may not lead to any kind of accountability. What we know is that Ashlee Jenae McGhee traveled to Africa to celebrate what she thought was the beginning of her future. A proposal, an engagement, a partnership with a man who seemed to match everything she'd been waiting for. But that man was hiding the truth. He was married. And when Ashlee discovered that truth, when the perfect life she'd been showcasing collapsed into betrayal and conflict, she found herself isolated on an island with no easy way out. We know that for 3 days, the conflict between them was serious enough that other people noticed. Serious enough that resort management intervened. Serious enough that they separated the couple physically. And we know that in the 2 to 3 hours after that separation, Ashlee died, and that Joseph waited 11 hours before telling her family, and that when he finally called, he lied. Those are the facts. The rest is questions. What happened in those 2 to 3 hours? Why the 11-hour delay? What did the autopsy reveal? Is there security footage? Are there phone records? Will there ever be charges? Will Ashlee's family ever get the answers they deserve? Some of those questions may never be resolved. But Ashlee Jenae McGhee's story doesn't end with unanswered questions. It ends with what we choose to do with them. It ends with the community that refuses to let her be forgotten. It ends with the family that fights every day for truth. It ends with the lessons that her death teaches about trust, about control, about the dangers that can hide behind perfect Instagram posts and viral proposals. Ashlee taught women not to settle. Don't settle for lies. Don't settle for secrets. Don't settle for anyone who makes you feel trapped. The soft life, the life she championed, isn't just about luxury. It's about safety. It's about autonomy. It's about having the power to walk away when something isn't right. And if there's anything her death makes brutally clear, it's that no amount of aesthetic perfection is worth your life. If you're traveling, especially internationally, especially with a romantic partner, share your itinerary with family. Check in regularly. Have access to your own resources, your own credit cards, your own documents. Know where the nearest embassy is. Trust your instincts. And if something feels wrong, find a way to leave. Ask for help. Reach out to anyone, hotel staff, other tourists, local authorities. Your safety is more important than avoiding embarrassment. Your life is more important than keeping up appearances. For those of you who followed Ashlee, who learned from her, who celebrated with her, the best way to honor her memory is to take those lessons seriously, to recognize the red flags, to support the people in your life who might be in dangerous situations, to believe them when they say something is wrong, and to keep demanding answers when cases like this are swept aside. This is Case Crime Analyst. We're going to continue following this story. Every development, every piece of new information, every step Ashlee's family takes in their fight for justice. If you want to stay updated, subscribe to this channel. Hit the like button so this video reaches more people. Share Ashlee's story. Make sure she's not forgotten. Because women like Ashlee Jenae McGhee, women who were trying to live authentically, who were teaching others to demand better, who died under circumstances that don't add up, they deserve more than silence. They deserve answers. They deserve justice. And they deserve communities that refuse to look away. Ashlee Jenae McGhee was 31 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. She thought she was exactly where she needed to be. She deserved to be. But the man beside her had lied about everything. And now, all we can do is make sure that her story, her life, her death, and the questions that still surround it are not forgotten. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And thank you for demanding the truth with us. This is Case Crime Analyst. Stay safe, stay vigilant, and never stop asking questions.